watching NASA TV.
Good afternoon and welcome to our post-flight news conference with NASA astronaut Kate Rubins, who has just returned from the International Space Station after a 185-day stay in space. After launching back on October 14th, she and her crewmates Sergei Ryzhikov and Sergei Kuznechov landed in Kazakhstan at 11:55 p.m. Central on Friday, and she spent the last few days readjusting to Earth's gravity. We have about 30 minutes with Kate for questions, and we'll be taking them from reporters on the line with us. You can press *1 to raise your hand or *2 to withdraw your question if it gets asked. And we'll also be taking questions from social media. If you're following along at home, you can submit yours using the hashtag #AskNASA. We'll get started on questions in just a moment, but first I wanted to give Kate the opportunity to say a few words. Kate?
Hi, it is actually really wonderful to be with you today. It's so great to be back on the planet. Space is incredible. I really enjoyed this mission. It was 185 days orbiting the Earth, but it was a wonderful thing to land and to be with you all, and I'm looking forward to your questions today.
Okay, we are going to start with some from social media. Just a reminder to the reporters online that you can press *1 to enter your question. Let's go to Haley from White County, Illinois on Twitter, who is asking if COVID-19 affected any research on the space station in any way.
Yeah, Haley, that is a great question. Of course, COVID's affecting everything on Earth, and even things like how we process scientific samples that are going to be launched to the space station. So as you can imagine, a lot of the research team had to deal with things like delays, slowdowns in their research, difficulty with logistics and shipping, and figuring out a completely new way to do things. Despite all of this, it was actually incredible. We got almost all of the experiments that were planned to launch on this mission were launched. We conducted hundreds of experiments on board the International Space Station, and to think that everybody was able to do that with all of the challenges and the delays, it's pretty impressive. It's a testament to the International Space Station program.
Absolutely is. Okay, one more from Twitter from Blaine, and he asked, were there any surprises with the experiments that you were working on?
Blaine, that's a good question. We sometimes don't know what to expect when we do science on the International Space Station. That's the reason that we do things in microgravity. I was quite surprised actually by some of the larger tissue architecture experiments that we were looking at. So when we were looking at tissues in 3 dimensions, which is a little different than we've done before, we could see changes in the behavior of the tissues, how they organized, for example, how the heart cells were beating. We saw some really interesting surprises with some of the C. elegans experiment. These are nematodes. These are small worms, and their behavior in space actually reminded me a little bit of astronaut behavior in terms of how we slow down and move around. So we made some of those notes during the experiment. This is going to help the researchers out to find such a difference in microgravity.
That is so cool. Okay, we're going to take some from reporters now on the phone line. One more reminder to press *1 if you have a question on the phone bridge. Let's start with Paul Brinkman from UPI.
Yes, hello. Thanks for taking my question. Kate, there are more cruise spacecraft being developed all the time now, and I'm just wondering, as an astronaut, do you pretty much want to fly on as many types of spacecraft as possible? And specifically, what are your impressions of Crew Dragon and Orion, compared to Soyuz, I guess?
This is a very exciting time for human spaceflight to see this many spacecraft in development, and a lot of them have their own purpose. So, for example, Orion is a spacecraft that's really going to take us into exploration, to the moon, into deep space and beyond. Yes, as an astronaut, you'd like to fly as many missions as possible. My crewmate, Soichi Noguchi, has actually flown on 3 different spacecraft, Soyuz, Shuttle, and Crew Dragon, and so we were asking him all the time to give us kind of these comparisons. These are all incredible spacecraft. They're very capable. For me, it's really wonderful to be able to be up there on the International Space Station when Crew 1 launched. This is an exciting time for America in human spaceflight to have our own capability. The fact that those guys are launching from Florida and landing not too soon, it's incredibly exciting, and I really encourage everybody to watch this coverage. This is a chapter in spaceflight that's new. It's exciting. We haven't seen this kind of thing before.
All right, let's go to Mark Rowe next from Aviation Week.
How were you able to advance your previous work in the sequencing of DNA, and do you have some examples of advantages you think this could bring to the future of space science and exploration?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, we were able to advance quite a bit from the 2016 initial sequencing. So since I was back on Earth in the interim, that team actually developed a lot of different ways of processing samples, so they could go straight from a swab to a sequence, which was really important if you're looking at microbes or environmental samples or even human samples. We're also able to process more samples. So we started doing something called multiplexing, where you attach a DNA barcode to each individual sample. And then you can mix those together and you can run one sequencing reaction. And we were running 8 when I was on board, but you could do 96, you could do 1,000. And so you really are able to expand your throughput. I got a chance to go do, they let me do a little bit of the sampling that I was interested in. So we sampled some interesting microbial locations as well as negative controls. And then we did a really big experiment. The sequencing will be done on the ground, but we sampled about 800 different environmental samples on the space station. So a full spatial map of the International Space Station. That was one I've been talking about for years, and I was lucky enough to be up there when we were doing it.
All right, next we have I think a student reporter from the student paper at Vintage High School, which I think you're familiar with.
Hi, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for reaching out and asking me to come ask you a question. I did go around the Vintage campus and, got to talk to some teachers about possible questions to ask you. Vintage is super happy, super proud of having an astronaut that's graduated from our school. It's a huge inspiration. So our question that we came up with as a student at Vintage, we were wondering if you ever saw yourself becoming an astronaut. And we were curious, if that was the case, if you had any inspirations or just how that came to be.
I had a lot of inspirations at Vintage High School, actually. AP Biology was certainly one of them. So I always wanted to be an astronaut, but I also wanted to be a biologist and a molecular biologist. One of the things I can most clearly remember, this is not new technology now, but it certainly was then, was being able to run out DNA strands on a gel and interpret those. This was a pretty big deal for a high school class, and that made me feel, it was one of the first things that we did in AP Biology that made me feel like, oh, I could be a real molecular biologist someday. So certainly a lot of inspiration, and I hope kids are finding that in their science classes these days at Vintage as well, and in high schools all across the U.S. The kinds of things you do in high school now are some of the things that only graduate students could dream about earlier. So it's really starting people off into a great career in science.
Thanks for joining us, Shelby. Next, let's take a question from Russell Pounds with Pacific Rim Media.
Good morning, Kate. Great to hear from you, and welcome home. And I'm thinking about the students in this question and looking for an aha moment that you may have had that they can appreciate. And that great question from your high school alluded to this. But the question is, was there something that you experienced that was an aha moment that might inspire young people to pursue a career in science? Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, I had a lot of aha moments going along. I do remember a very early one that was actually even before high school. I went to a conference on recombinant DNA technology, and I probably understood 10% of what the scientists were talking about. But I think that was a really interesting thing to do, to bring a kid. My dad brought me as a kid to a very advanced scientific conference, even if there's not a lot that you have the fundamentals to follow, to listen to scientists talking about integrating DNA into the genome. I just thought this was fascinating. And even though it was a level I couldn't grasp, it was an ability to see what I could do. If I got enough education and training in the future, then maybe I could be one of those scientists who is so interestedly talking about this subject. So I think there's discoveries that people make all of the time because they're just interested in things that they're not necessarily completely trained in the fundamentals of. And so I think students in particular are very valuable in that area. I had a lot of undergraduates in my lab, and I really encourage high school students, undergraduates, go to as many advanced scientific things as you can. Even if you only understand 10% of it, it's going to inspire you to pursue a career in that area.
Okay, we're going to go back to social media now. Just a reminder for the reporters online, if you do have a question, press *1 to let us know. But I think you'll like this one, Kate. Pablo from Ecuador is asking whether the results from your work with DNA in space have given you any ideas of what you'd like to test or research on the moon for Artemis.
Yes, that's a great question. And I'm not on the scientific design committee for Artemis, but I do always put forth the proposal that I think we really need to understand the microbial complement of humans as we explore the universe. So we try to reduce the number of microbes that we bring with us when we go into new planetary territory, but we're not going to bring it down to zero, and we really need to understand what we're bringing with us before we go to Mars. Obviously, if we want to go to Mars and we want to discover life, we don't want to just sequence some bacteria that we brought with us from the Earth. So there's a lot of really smart people in planetary protection that are working on this and thinking about this. And I always think that the moon is a very good control for what we're bringing to Mars. We're going to have suits, that are probably pretty similar, spacecraft, the whole human architecture, and we can sample everything that we're bringing with us and develop a library and a catalog. So I like saying that the moon is a negative control for Mars. This is a kind of a nerdy scientific thing to say, but I think it would be a really incredibly interesting experiment to sample the lunar surface just as we're doing the course of our exploration and understand our microbial footprint.
Can't wait. Maggie from Argentina asked on Twitter, what will you do now that you're back on Earth, and do you have any side projects besides NASA-related ones that you're working on?
Yeah, so we spend the first about 45 days when we come back doing a lot of debriefs. We talk to all the flight controllers, the researchers, scientists, everybody that was involved in the mission, give them some updates. We don't have a lot of time to talk about things on board, and so when we return, we can do a lot more of these debriefs. We work on getting our physical conditioning, our reconditioning back. We've got some wonderful astronaut strength and rehabilitation coaches that help us get used to gravity again. That's quite a hard thing. And then we'll start working on office jobs. We work a lot of technical jobs, so I'm hoping to work some scientific related projects with expanding our International Space Station molecular and cellular research capabilities. And I worked a lot on spacesuits before my last mission, so I hope to do some of that spacesuit and spacewalk development work again.
On that subject, Burke on Twitter asked if there are any differences between your first feelings when you landed on Earth back in 2016 and now in 2021. How long does it take you to get back to normal?
Yeah, it's actually a lot quicker adjustment the second time around. So, I just saw a few of the new people that are getting ready to fly for the first time, and I said, well, the first time's a little bit rough, but your second time will be a lot better. So it goes both ways, uphill and downhill. So we adapt a lot quicker to microgravity on our second launch, and same thing, landing feels a lot better. Part of it is just knowing what to expect. Landing is a very dynamic sequence. You're going through plasma, you have the shock of the parachutes opening, you have the actual event where you're slamming into Earth at a fairly high speed. So if you have a little bit of situational awareness about how all of this is going to go, I thought it was fun both times, but it was certainly a little bit more fun the second time when I knew what was coming next.
So if you can go to space, even better to go twice. William from Facebook asked one of the standard questions for returning astronauts. What was the first meal you had once you got back?
So the folks that were picking us up in Kazakhstan and bringing us back to the U.S. Actually got a surprise meal for me, and they got me a steak and some French fries, and I thought that was great. But I've been eating a lot of salad since I got back. I got really excited about some just tomatoes and strawberries, anything that's fresh. We don't get a lot of fresh food in space, and so it's pretty funny to get very excited about a spinach salad, but I think that's just about the best thing in the world right now.
Maybe spring is the right time to return to Earth then. Okay, let's go back to the phone bridge and take a question from Doris with space.com.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my question. You've been on spacewalks with several different astronauts, and I wondered how does it feel to spacewalk with one person versus another, and considering that there will be missions to farther places than just Earth orbit that may have the possibility of longer mission durations, what kind of interpersonal qualities are important for space crewmanship?
Thanks, Doris. That's a really good question. I think a lot of what we do at NASA is working on that teamwork, how we're going to work together as a small group in a really high pressure situation. And certainly a spacewalk is about one of the highest pressure situations we put people in. Spacewalks are dangerous. You're out there in vacuum, your suit's down at 4.2 psi, and your buddy that you're out there with is responsible for saving your life, and you're responsible for saving their life. And so that dynamic of teamwork is incredibly important. I've been so fortunate to be able to spacewalk with just some amazing astronauts. So the person who essentially taught me how to spacewalk was Jeff Williams. He's a very experienced NASA astronaut, and it was really wonderful to be able to do a spacewalk with Victor Glover and then also Soichi Noguchi on this last mission. And so I think each team functions a little bit differently, but we've all been trained in the exact same way. We work very hard on our communication skills with each other, our communication with the ground, knowing all of the tasks that we're going to perform. It's a very choreographed type of activity. It takes a long time to plan these spacewalks, and then also to be very flexible and to be able to plan on the fly when things don't go exactly right. So we had some bolts that were not behaving as expected. They've been in space for a number of years, and the teams were able to discuss this, plan, replan, talk about all of the structural and mechanical implications, and get us a solution. And we were able to successfully install the equipment. And so that kind of thing doesn't happen unless you have a lot of trust among the teams and a very high level of communication, coordination, and previous training together.
Okay, and let's take a follow-up question next from Paul Brinkman with UPI.
Yeah, thank you very much. Kate, I heard that you perhaps you ate the first radish grown in space that anyone's ever ate. You mentioned fresh food in space, and so I was wondering if you could just tell us how that was. And I was surprised to learn that NASA still has concerns about eating food that was grown in space. So, if we're going for longer missions, obviously that's going to be important to develop that. I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, this is a very active area. Looking at plants and crops grown in space kind of falls into two areas. One is just the plant research. We're very interested in what's different in microgravity about these plants, and so a lot of the radishes were grown for research processing. So we took samples to do RNA and gene expression analysis. We froze some of the radishes to bring them back. We did get a few to harvest, and I wasn't the first and only. I shared these with my crewmates, so the whole crew was the first to eat radishes in space. They were delicious. We all gave them 5-star reviews. I think a really important thing for NASA going forward, and we have a lot of people working on this, is how do we do more production scale crops? How are we going to really work to feed humans and produce fresh food? It can be difficult to get all the nutrients that you need in from packaged food, particularly for something like a Mars mission where that food may be pre-stowed up to 5 years before you're going to actually eat it. So fresh food is going to be a very important component of our diet, and how we can figure out ways to grow fresh food in a spacecraft environment. We're going to think a lot about the microbial component there. We have to make sure things are safe to eat. We've got some disinfection protocols on board. One of the things I got to do was map some of the microbial environments around the plants and around the plant growth facilities. That's going to be really important. And another thing that we're thinking about is how can we recycle materials. Earth Day, we're all thinking a lot about this, but ways that we can take materials that we're using on board station and possibly compost those. Can we break those down and have that serve as plant nutrients? Can the plants become integrated in our ecosystem on board the International Space Station? These are all super cool areas of research. If folks are students or undergrads, this is a burgeoning field, and I think it would be really neat. If I was a young person, I would definitely like to research crops on the way to Mars. What a cool project.
You've talked about several different experiments that you worked on, and we have questions from both Colin on Twitter and Jennifer on Facebook who are asking if you can pick a favorite.
Oh, that's hard. That is hard. I really did enjoy a lot of the molecular biology experiments. So I'm going to cheat. I'm not going to pick a favorite. I'm just going to tell you my several favorites. I really enjoyed the cardinal heart experiment. That was a follow-on to a 2016 experiment with cardiomyocytes, with heart cells. This one added more cell types. So we looked at endothelial cells and fibroblasts as well. These are all these different kinds of cells that make up your heart tissue. And so the multiple cell types actually replicate the organ a little bit better than just a single cell type. I quite enjoyed the C. elegans experiment because that's a model for genetics. So that's a really well-known model system, and we could look at both behavior of the worms as well as the genetics of the worms under these space-flight conditions. And then I got kind of excited about some of the things that are outside of my realm. We're doing some really neat combustion experiments when I was on board, and then fluidics experiments. So we were talking about plants earlier, and some of the ways that we're thinking about growing crops on board spacecraft is actually with hydroponics. And so trying to understand how water and how fluids are going to move around plant roots and how we could do large-scale crop growth. All of these things are coming together in a really neat way. And so it's not molecular biology, but it sure was fascinating, and I got to ask a lot of questions to the PIs while I was doing these sets of experiments on board.
I'm sure they are excited to hear you talking about their experiments too. How about this one? Liam on Twitter wants to know if you're going to be interacting with Crew 1 guys once they get back onto Earth.
Oh, of course. So, the Expedition 64 was a mixed Soyuz and a Crew 1, and we really were one big family once we get on board Space Station. And so I landed a little bit before then, but I'm going to be very excited to watch both the launch of Crew 2. This is coming up very soon. And then once Crew 2 launches, the next thing up is the landing of Crew 1. So it'll be nice to welcome my friends back onto the planet, and I think they're going to have a lot of really exciting things to say and to talk about. I'll look forward to watching their news conference and listen to what they have to say about the SpaceX, the Crew Dragon vehicle, its performance. The whole thing is just really neat to watch, and I was pretty lucky to be part of all of it.
I'm sure they can't wait to see you as well. How about one now with Earth Day coming up tomorrow? Exix on Twitter asked, what was the first thing you said to yourself when you saw Earth from the space station? And I would just add to it, since you've been to space before, did it live up to your memory?
Yeah, the very first time I saw Earth was actually from a Soyuz. We were in a 2-day phasing we were the first of a new Soyuz vehicle, and so we did a lot of time checking that Soyuz out, and we had 2 days orbiting independently. After you launch, you don't look out the window right away. There's a few technical details to take care of, and it takes a minute or two until you really get that first glimpse. I was blown away. I couldn't even talk, actually. I was kind of prepared to not be very overwhelmed because I thought, well, I've seen this a lot in Mission Control. I've seen the IMAX movie. I've seen the videos. And there's something about seeing it with your own eyes. It's a lot brighter than when you see on the movies or television, and just that three-dimensional aspect. So I just kind of did I couldn't say a word. For me, that's pretty remarkable. And I was just quiet for a few minutes. The second flight, it was about the same thing. I think it's one of those views that never gets old. Right before I was going to undock, I went to the window one last time, and I thought, I may never be in space again. I'm just gonna look out. We happened to be flying over Florida and the Bahamas, so there was this beautiful, beautiful blue water, and I just thought, this is breathtaking. It's so incredible.
It sounds like it. Okay, one more from a Twitter, well, actually probably two more. A Twitter user asking if anything unusual or unexpected happened to you while you were in space.
I think everything is pretty planned and expected. We did have some interesting maintenance work. We know the space station is getting a little bit older, and so we had a few unusual things. For example, an oxygen generator that needed to be replaced. There was nothing this flight that was too different from the previous one. So I kind of knew what to expect in terms of the experiments and the pace and the way things happen on board the space station. I think that there's always something new every day in space just because you're there. So I did notice, we're just doing experiments with like things like the plant water growth. There were experiments that I was doing on my own just with pipetting. So we're always discovering something new. I do remember just before undocking, about a week or so, I was looking at one of the windows in the Japanese module, and the solar array, the giant joint that points the solar array, was tilted it just the right way so that it was reflecting flashes of lightning off the Earth on the space station. And I thought, wow, holy cow, I've never seen that before. That was new. It was incredible. I sat there and I watched it for a little while.
I love that. Okay, last one. This one from Little Note 140 on Twitter asking, are you willing to go back to the space station? And if so, what's the most important thing you'll bring with you next time?
Yes, I'd absolutely go back to the space station again. I'd love to go back to space, but we've got a lot of new people. There's a lot of new astronauts in the class that just graduated from their initial training, and I'm really excited to see them fly. So for me, it's actually going to be more exciting to be on the ground and to mentor folks and to watch them go through their first flight. In terms of bringing things with you, there's not a lot you need to bring with you to space. It's important to have a few photographs of family, a journal, those kinds of things. But mostly just the sense of awe and wonder. That's all you need for a wonderful space flight.
Very good advice for the future space travelers. That is all we have time for today. Thank you so much, Kate, for talking with us. It has been a big month for NASA already, and there's lots more to come. Tomorrow is, of course, Earth Day, and Kate's former crewmates are going to be celebrating with a special event tomorrow at 10 a.m. Central that you can watch here on NASA TV. And there'll also be a NASA Science Live event at 2 p.m. Central. Then on Friday, tune in early at 12:30 a.m. Central Time for coverage of the Crew 2 launch from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Liftoff is scheduled for 4:49 a.m. Central, and then those 4 astronauts are going to arrive at the space station on Saturday. You can keep up with all of this at nasa.gov. Thanks, and have a great afternoon. And liftoff. Kate Rubins, Sergei Ryzhikov, and Sergei Kuznetsov now on their way to the International Space Station, the latest in a chain that spans almost 20 years of continuous human presence in space. 10 seconds, the parameters of the rocket are nominal. 20 seconds. The thrusters of the first and second stage are operating nominally. Hearing first good reports of good first stage performance, everything looking nominal. Sweet is currently delivering 930,000 pounds of thrust from its 4 boosters and single engine of that first stage. It measures 68 feet in length and 24 feet in diameter, and burns liquid fuel for the first 2 minutes and 6 seconds of flight. 50 seconds, the pressure in the chambers is nominal. Good on board, we feel well. Good reports from the crew as well.
Right now, giving high fives and all smiles. And Hi, Kate.
Here, right here.
Welcome home. And here she comes.
And even 300 days in space on her 2 missions, Kate Rubins is home.
We have lots of laughs and smiles right now as Kate is coming down.
Slide down. Okay, here. Hold her and let's go.
And she's being brought over to her chair right now. Okay, Rob.
Press her.
Kate Rubin has been seated in her chair.
Well, in my left hand, I have a feather. In my right hand, a hammer. And I guess one of the reasons we got here today was because of a gentleman named Galileo a long time ago who made a rather significant discovery about falling objects in gravity fields. And we thought that where would be a better place to confirm his findings than on the moon. And so we thought we'd try it here for you. The feather happens to be appropriately a falcon feather for our falcon. And I'll drop the 2 of them here, and hopefully they'll hit the ground at the same time. How about that?
Hi everybody. Since I've been back from space, I have accumulated a lot of fan mail.
What a crazy